Hey everyone, I am Deverly Di Castro, and to continue the report about demonstration and verbal instruction, let me present to you the audio modeling. So, auditory models that help us understand the mechanism of the human auditory system. By using digital signal processing algorithms, we model in authority nerves responses of the analyzed and features available with two ears. So, this our discussion so far was focused on visual demonstration, but however, there are skills for which visual demonstration is less effective or learning than other forms of demonstration. So so that auditory modeling is uh, more effective accordingly. So an example is a skill for which the goal is to move in a certain criterion. So in auditory, movement, time, or rhythm. These types of skill in auditory modeling is a form of demonstration that seems to work best in auditory modeling, ang movement, time, or rhythm. So, a good research example of the effectiveness of auditory modeling when the goal is specific movement time is an experiment by Bird and Ross 1985. So, accordingly, their task required people to perform a complex sequential movement with one hand in a criterion movement time of 2.1 seconds. So, the visual and auditory demonstration sa ilang research is observed in a videotape of skilled model before each practice trial. The visual demonstration group saw only the video portion of the tape and heard no sound. So, when we say auditory, it is related to the senses of human. Have you remember the five senses, which is the auditory, olfactory, the sense of sight, sense of hearing? But auditory is a sense of hearing. So the auditory demonstration group heard only audio portion of the modeled performance but did not see the model perform the task. So the result of the research indicate that the group that heard the audio portion of the performance did better the visual demonstration. The visual demonstration only group two research examples showing the benefit auditory modeling is learning rhythmic sequence. So as the result of the research of Doddy, Beard, and Dross 1985, so it can indicate that the group that heard the audio portion of the performance did better than a visual demonstration. There are two research examples showing the benefit of auditory modeling for learning rhythmic sequence. This research involves a laboratory task and a sequence of dance steps. So, in an experiment by Voigt and Beakers, 1995, so the people who had no prior dance or music experience learned a sequence of 32 choreographed steps. So, for acquiring the rhythmic timing of the sequence, participants who heard only the timing structure learned it as well as those who both saw and heard the model performance the sequence. So, therefore, accordingly, that participants who heard and saw the model performance sequence is do better in the research of kining Watts and Beakers. On the other hand, the experiment by Lai, Shia, and Bruckert and Little 2002, in which they found that auditory modeling enhanced the learning of a sequence of 5-time intervals when two keyboard keys were alternately depressed. So before each practice trial, so participant heard a sequence of tones that represent the timing of sequence they were to learn. So in that way, mas mugana ang auditory modeling. So how the observing of demonstration influence learning in terms of learning theory. So an important question is that why does observing demonstration benefit motor skill learning? So why? Why does observing demonstration maka-benefit sa motor skill learning in order for us to learn about motor skill? So there are two different views proposed to answer this question. We have here the cognitive mediation theory and dynamic view of modeling. So first, let's introduce the cognitive mediation theory. So cognitive mediation theory is the predominant view based on the work of Bandura 1986 concerning about the modeling and social learnings. This view called the cognitive mediation theory. So this theory explains the benefit of demonstration, proposing that when a person observes a skill model, the person translates the observed movement information into the cognitive code that a person stores in the memory and uses when the observer performs the skills. So got it? The cognitive processing serves as a mediator between the perception of movement information and the performance of skill by establishing a cognitive memory representation between the perception and the action. So according to Bandura, there are 4 sub-processes govern observational learning in this kind of theory, the what we called cognitive mediation theory. So the first is the attention process. So this involves what the person observes and the information he or she extracts from the model's actions. So because of the importance of the attention process for learning, directing full attention to the demonstration rather than the mere observation of it is more important for optimal learning. So it is important, no, the attention process, because it makes you more attentive to adapt the observation and apply it as a motor learning. So the second one, we have there the retention process, in which the person transforms and restructures what he or she observes into a symbolic codes that the person stores in memory. So certain cognitive activities such as rehearsals, labeling, and organization are evolved in the retention process and benefit the development of this representation, the retention process. The retention process. So the behavior production process is the third sub-process. So this behavior production process is the third sub-process. So during this behavior production process, the person translates the memory representation of the modeled action and turns it into physical action. So successful accomplishment of this process requires that the individual possess the physical capability to perform the modeled action. So it is the behavior in which the capability to perform the modeled action. So lastly, we have the motivational process. It involves the incentive or motivation to perform the modeled action. So this process then focused on all those factors that influence a person's motivation to perform. Unless this process is completed, the person will not perform the action. So in this process, the motivational process, it is the process by which you're going to push yourself to perform the specific action. So according to the saying that nobody nobody can push you except yourself. So to do something, so you should push yourself to uh, do the action for your own good. Okay, so what that is the motivation process. So there are some several there are several there are several research studies that have provided support for the cognitive mediation theory by demonstrating evidence that is in line with predictions of the theory. So for example, we have the theory of Shimmery 2000. It provided the support for the prediction that attention is an important process in observational learning. In a series of 4 experiments, participants who had to divide their attention between performing a cognitive secondary task, counting backward by threes, and observing a model did not learn the skill as well as those who did not perform a secondary task. So, in an experiment discussed in Chapter 10 by Smith and Pendleton, 1990, showed that the prevention of the rehearsal process hindered learning a skill. In their experiment, some participants engaged in movement activity during the interval of time between the demonstration of the sequence of movements and their attempts to reproduce those movements. So these participants recalled fewer movements than those who did not engage in activity during the time of interval. So finally, here, the Blandin and Protiu 2000 provided evidence that observational learning involves the development of effective error detection and correction, so which the cognitive mediation theory describes as an important function of memory representation that develops during observational learning. So in 2 experiments prior to observation of a model permitted learner to estimate their errors as effectively as learners who had physical practiced the task. So there are several theories that uh, that has the notion about the what we call the cognitive mediation theory. And to answer how the observing of demonstration influence learning, so let's proceed to the second way of answering that question. We have here the dynamic view of modeling. So, dynamic view of modeling is the second view based on the direct perception view of vision proposed many years ago by J.J. Jobson 1966, 1979. So, Scully and Newell 1985 adapted Gibson's view to the visual observation of a skill demonstration and proposed the dynamic view of modeling as an alternative to Bandura's theory. So the dynamic view questions the need for the symbolic coding step, so the memory representation step, or the symbolic coding step. So between the observation of the modeled action and the physical performance of that action, instead, it maintains the visual system is capable of automatically processing visual information in such a way that it constrains the motor control system to act according what the visual system depicts. So the visual system picks up from the model salient information that effectively constrain the body and limbs to act in a specific way. Okay? So the person does not need to transform the important received via visual system into cognitive code and store it in memory. This is the case that the visual information directly provides the basis for coordination and control of the various body parts required to produce the action. So the critical need for the observer in the early stage of learning is to observe demonstrations that enable him or her to perceive the important and variant coordination relationships between body parts. So in addition, observations of the model will benefit the learner by helping the person learn to parameterize the action or to expressed in terms of parameters. So, okay, so which do you think is the correct view between the two? But unfortunately, there is no conclusive evidence in the research literature that shows one of these two views of modeling effect to be the more valid one. So since they are all theories naman. So as you saw in the discussions of each view, both have research support for some specific assertions. As a result, until we have research evidence that one view cannot explain, we must consider which view is a possible explanation of why modeling benefits skills acquisition. So the cognitive mediation theory has been the more prominent of the two, receiving more attention in motor skill research. However, the dynamic view is growing in popularity. So we cannot conclude who's who's the perfectly correct sa two ka views. So that ends my part of the report. I hope you've got some important information about demonstration and verbal instructions. Thank you.